Hey, all, this is the WPC Plus podcast. I am Pierre. He is Nick, and we're here to talk about fantasy baseball draft season and how to use value based drafting to get an advantage in your league. So, Nick is going to break down using our recent, well, it's still ongoing draft in the Great Fantasy Baseball Invitational, TGFBI. If you haven't heard of it, check it out on Twitter. Search at TGFBI, and you can follow along with us. Plenty of other RotoBallers and other industry experts are drafting as we speak. So we're going to talk about how to use the concept of, well, what you call value cliffs and, relative to each other, how you can figure out when to strike at a position and when not to. So Nick, is this an approach you use in every single draft, regardless of the format?
Every single draft. It, it's. I'm not the first person to be saying this. I know this for a fact because I've read it in the process of an excellent fantasy book put out a couple years ago and other books, and I've heard other people talk about it. So yeah, it's the biggest. Like I can and I agree with what they say that using value based drafting is kind of the biggest leap you can make, like quick leap into just really improving just your overall drafting and being able to balance your categories and less guessing about what a player is worth and at different points in the draft as well. And it's just that it takes some of the guesswork out. It also, I can just tell you from experience of drafting without it before and the way I've done it the past few years is that you feel like you get sniped a lot less just because you're just moving. If someone you had your eyes on gets taken, you move on to the next position. I bet you'll usually find someone that is just as valuable, at least relative to is left in the pool.
And I'll tell you, I think that's the biggest leap, like you said, is you really have to take the emotional part out of it. You can't try to look for your guy, right? I really like this guy. I really want this guy. You have to look at it purely from a statistical standpoint. And the thing is, okay, I've been playing fantasy baseball for a long time, right? A really long time, but haven't been an analyst for more than just a few years before I really got heavy into it. And you kind of intuitively understand the fact that there's a big jump, or drop off from certain players to certain others, but understanding exactly what that gap is, I think that's the key. A lot of our rankings are tier based, right? We always have tiers and we talk about groups of players, but just because you go from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3, that still doesn't explain the whole story, right? About how much more valuable one player or one group is for the other. But again, for somebody who has been playing fantasy but doesn't really get deep into the rankings or deep into values, or somebody say, well, why do we have to assign dollar values to a player, right? Why can't we just say, I like this guy at this position, I like this guy better at this other position? I think that's, like you said, the next step is understanding why that matters so much.
Yeah, and that's it. Understanding, regardless of what categories you're using in, a roto setup, what you have to understand is not just what you are, and this isn't just about like make clear, like this isn't just about taking projections and blindly following them. This is making turning people into stats into values is more about understanding what that group of stats that you're kind of trusting or you at least looking at what it represents when all of five categories are working together and what the difference in value is when the difference of a guy who hits 40 home runs and is bats 240 over 600 plate appearances. What is he compared to a guy that hits 31 home runs but bats 275 over 650 plate appearances? It's not just the difference in home runs. It's also you also got to take into, and it's not just the difference in average. It's also how many plate appearances that average is coming over, and it's how and that's just home runs and average. And you also have runs, RBIs, stolen bases, and they're each adding something to a player's overall value. and that understanding that balance. Not you don't need to know it perfectly, but what dollar value do is allow you to kind of get a like speak a common language, kind of like understand like you don't have to believe the projection exactly, but if you trust your valuation system, you can kind of see like, okay, these five stats are roughly worth this, and now I can take this dollar value and compare it to a different player and say, okay, now it's instead of comparing five numbers against five numbers, it's comparing one number against one number, and that's just it really makes a large difference.
All right, so let's walk through that process, and we're going to use real results from TGFBI so far. Of course, we're depending on your league, only a few rounds into it. I think we're in round 10 right now in my league. So, talk to me about how you thought through this process. Now, in round one, there's really not much cap at all. The order of these players might change, but for the most part, the top 10 kind of the same in almost every league. So there's not a lot of volatility. Does I know draft slot a lot of
So
times matters, but how much difference is there a difference really with a guy that you're taking, number 3 versus number 6 versus number 9? How is there a huge difference?
uh, I think the difference is let now like value difference. Like yeah, there is there's a large difference between Fernando Tatis or whoever you have at number one, and maybe the number 9 or 10 guy in like value and what just general value, or even like the number 5 guy. Like that's why they're getting taken number one. But a lot of it is more about kind of how, for me at least, is how you want your draft. Like my first round pick, I know I'm getting a great player. Uh, so it what this player is less important to kind of how this first player is going to guide the rest of my draft, because I'm not going to go into a draft and be like, all right, I'm going to take 3 pitchers in the first 4 rounds, and then I'm going to take a closer in the 7th round, and I'm going to I want all these positions filled by through the first 10 rounds or whatever. I'm going to take the draft what it gives me, and that's kind of what we'll be getting into. But so the first pick is more about like I'm making it, and I'm kind of making a decision on, okay, I can kind of map out, looking at my values, like the player options I'm going to have in the next few rounds, and balance that first pick is just going to set the floor. I mean, is it I mean, the big question is obviously is pitcher or hitter, depending on where you're picking. That's the number one like guiding question. But it's also position wise. Like I don't like picking near the top. Like I'm happy to take Ronald Acuna. I love Juan Soto. Like I would take him. I'd take him one. I probably will take him one in some draft. But I generally don't like to take outfielders in the first round, just because there's a lot of outfielders I usually like every year. There's a ton of outfielders I love this year. So guys like Yelich and Bellinger, if I'm picking the back end of the ground, those guys are getting tossed aside. So and what we're going to be talking about today with my values, it's a Z score based system. I have some tweaks to mine that make my numbers seem a little wacky. So once again, these are not auction values. Like you'll know when I start talking about the size of these numbers. I do a pretty curated player pool, as well as I keep. This is an important thing, especially in a 2 catcher league. I keep catchers separate and make them just their own pool. I don't let their terrible statistics weigh down my averages in out of all my other good hitters. But to make it's some not super complicated math. When you take whatever your player pool is, and you start with home runs, and you want to calculate what's called a Z score for home runs. I'm going to do some quick back of the napkin math explaining. So please, real mathematicians, don't get mad at me and yell at me that I don't know that I'm not explaining it thoroughly enough. I promise it's right. Um, so you want to so start with home runs, and you take how many player home runs a player hits. They say you got them projected to hit 40 home runs, and then you subtract what the average home runs of your player pool is. Say it's 18 or 19 or whatever, and then you take that number and you divide it by the standard deviation. and that's going to give you a Z score. So for like Fernando Tatis, for example, he has a Z score in home runs of 2.1. I have him projected to hit 39 home runs. Trey Turner, I have a Z score in home runs. He doesn't hit a lot of home runs, 0.2. That means he's right above, like, 0.0 is average. So he's right, he's right above average, not giving a lot of home runs. That makes sense with Trey Turner. So you get a number for home runs, and then you do the same thing for runs and RBIs and stolen bases and batting average. Batting average is a little different just because the ratio stat, you need to do some math to convert into a counting stat before you can then make the Z score, just an extra step. But then you're wound up, you have 5 separate numbers, how they are versus the average essentially in each category. You add those numbers together, and that gives you a total Z score. And to turn that into a dollar amount, it's not that hard. You take their Z score and you divide it by all the positive Z scores in your player pool, and you do some multiplication with that, because you hear a lot about the hitter pitcher split and how many dollars you want to allocate out of to hitters and to pitchers, and that's basically just, once again, you don't have to be in auction for these things to count. In a 12-team league, you start with each team getting $260, and that gives you a total pool of dollars. And if your hitter pitcher split is 67%, so that number times 67% is the hitter dollars. And do a little math to compare the Z scores to the total dollars available, and that gives you a dollar number. And so that's what we're basing on. It's turning 5 stats into 1 stat. That's the simplest way to put it. And then the other thing, and the reason, and what we'll see, because we're going to be going through the first 9 rounds of my TGFBI real quick, and after we go through each round, my calculator, you get rid of players, and people get drafted, they leave the pool, all their stats leave with them. So then everything recalculates. All those calculations we just talked about, now everything reruns except with all the players just got drafted, they're gone. So now all the numbers are different. So the numbers, the inflation keeps going up, and you can kind of see, like, and that's what we're going to talk about, is you can see what happens when 3 second basemen with big power get taken in a row, like what it does to the values. Like, suddenly power comes more expensive, and these are the things that can kind of help guide you to, like, what categories you need to attack, what positions you need to attack, because of what is happening in the draft around you. And like I said, it's just about, you don't have to blindly follow the numbers. You don't have to, where they're valuations or projections. It's more about kind of getting things boiled down to some simpler numbers that you can really leverage to, like, actually use in a draft, instead of just, going with the more casual, I like this guy. And just, it's about taking the guesswork out.
Yeah, that seems like a sound strategy. And look, if you're into fantasy baseball, you obviously are a fan of statistics in general, but it's about taking that next step and making it more actionable, because it's easy to just look and say, oh, this guy could hit 30 plus home runs. This guy could be one of the top, base stealers in the league. But again, it's all about the relative value, and that's exactly why I think this explains why a guy like Mondesi, out of Belgium, Mondesi, is drafted so high, because other than maybe Trey Turner, who else even has, within the realm of possible outcomes to match him or come close to matching him in stolen base production? Now, is it a guarantee that he'll get 50 stolen bases like there's some of the projection systems say? Of course not. He could get sent down halfway through the season for all we know, and that's a whole different subject, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, on another pod, which is the whole idea of volatility. But again, that's because when you look at what could be the case for Mondesi, again, the drop off in that stolen base production, it's just such a big difference for those other players, not just even at his position, but at every position. But let's get to the actual breakdown player by player. And so I love the part where you said that it changes as you go, because again, it's all about that relativity, right? So what's left on the table each time you draft and each time players get taken off the board, Well, their value changes based on who has and hasn't been taken. And so that's the concept is these values are always relative, but always shifting and changing. So, if there's a run on a position, all of a sudden, that position becomes a little more scarce and that drives up the value, of what's left, depending on, let's say you want a closer, right? Somebody who will get you at least 20 saves. Well, if everyone starts stockpiling closers, if you don't get the last guy who's left in that grouping that you assume is going to be part of that group, you know what? Then maybe you might as well wait because once that's gone, then the value isn't as high anymore. But
Exactly.
let's start with the first pick here. Now, again, the first round, the sooner the better, generally speaking. Is that pretty accurate to say that the value of the top players is pretty high? Talk to me a little quickly about pitching though, because a lot of people say, you have to get one of those aces, right? Those top three guys, but you don't want to go into a draft blind and saying, yeah, I'm going to take a pitcher in round one, end of story.
Yeah, no, it's so that's that's why this first pick for me was the real tone setter. Like, and honestly, the decision was made. The decision was made for me. I had the eighth pick in the draft. Uh, we were just a 15 team league, right in the middle. That is where I love to pick. That's my favorite. And I can kind of talk about this. I go through positions. I want to get the most information, and especially drafting the way I do, the way we're going to talk about, you get the most information about position runs and category runs. And I think you have to make a lot fewer reaches, and you can take more. Like I take calculated gambles on guys, and you don't have to wait. If you're gambling, if you're picking at the back end of 15 teamer, you're making a pretty strong gamble if you're passing a guy and hoping that he's going to make back to you. If it's someone that close, you have to take him if you want him because that game, if you have to wait 25 picks, like that's a big gamble. I have 15 picks between each of my picks, so I find I win a lot more of these small bets I make on taking chances. So picking eighth was, you talk about the pitchers. There were I knew I was going to get someone I really liked, because there are eight players that I really like. I am really nine if you throw in Trevor Story, but that's like I'm fine with any of these guys. I wanted a pitcher first. Um, I I was not going to go. I knew I wasn't going to go crazy pitcher heavy because for one, I knew every draft we've been seeing from TGFBI, a lot of them are just crazy pitcher heavy early, and I don't like to go with the crowd on these things. I zag. Uh, so, but if one of the top three pitchers was going to be at eight, and Degrom, Bieber, or Cole, in that order, I was going to take him. But they went early. Degrom went number two. Cole went five. Bieber went six. Uh,
Wow.
so then I'm left with essentially. And then Mookie Betts goes seven. So then it's like, as far as my values go, because I had a big gap between the pitchers. I have Degrom a little ahead of Bieber and Cole, who are basically tied, and then Cole in the last of that group. At once again, these are high, inflated and player pool adjusted dollars, not auction dollars. But Cole at the back end of that tier is $133, my initial valuation. Yu Darvish is 111 coming up next. Jack Flaherty and then there's like five guys that are like 91, 92. So that first tier is like a significant. That's why one of those guys significant gap. Like kind of my rough plan was, if one of those guys is there, I'm going to take him, and then I'm going to hammer hitter like a crazy person. And so when the pitchers weren't there, you know, looking, I didn't have to take Trey Turner. Trout was still there. I talked about Yelich. Story was there. Jose Ramirez. I love Trey Turner like a lot. Him, looking at my values, him and Trout essentially the same value. Trout a little bit higher at 104, had Trey Turner at 102. But I don't really want an outfielder. Uh, Mike Trout is not going to steal bases. So Trey Turner gives me five category goodness, but gives me, my second highest projected stolen bases. So really kind of sets the tone for at least on the stolen base side. That's I I I hate struggling with stolen bases. Like I was going to be one. Like I'm not going to reach crazy for speed guys, but I know I wasn't aggressive enough with stolen bases last year in TGFBI, and ended up doing a lot of chasing on the wire, and was constantly at the back end of the scoring. So Turner was a pretty big no brainer.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, that really kind of defines, your roster construction from there on out. It sets the tone essentially. So now at that point, you really don't have to worry about speed. Not that you're not going to, get anybody, who's going to give you stolen bases, but again, you don't have to chase. You don't have to get a guy because you think he might help you out. It alleviates that concern. You don't have to worry about stolen bases too much anymore, but also shortstop is set as opposed to outfield. You don't have to worry, as much about that because it's I'm a believer in the build up the middle philosophy. I like to get those high end middle infielders first too. But I was a similar situation, so I drafted number 7, and in my league, I was the one who struck first at pitcher. I got Degrom, so I was kind of lucky he was there. But you know what? If I had a decision, we kind of figure who the first 5 will be off the board. Although Mookie Betts going number 7 in your league is kind of crazy to me. I didn't see that coming. But
Yeah,
I guess that goes to show you how pitcher heavy. I thought my league was pitcher heavy. I guess yours was even more so. But
yeah, they went bananas.
yeah, so well then you kind of have no choice, right? You're not going to take one of those next pitchers because of the falling value. So for me, I kind of figure who is going to be left. It would be down to either DeGrom or Cole, depending on who might be available, or Turner. Well, as it turned out, Turner was taken before me, and all the pitchers were there, so I slightly leaned DeGrom over Cole. So similar start for both of us, but exact same philosophy. I love Turner in
Mm-hmm.
the first round this year. I was kind of surprised a lot of people weren't on him last year, for the same reasons, but let's go on to round 2 now. Surprisingly, there's a little bit more volatility in some of these. You think round 2, not a lot of surprises. Some of the guys we talked about, like Francisco Lindor, in some leagues he went in the first round. He was a top 10 pick in one case, and in some leagues he went as low as 25. So there's still a lot of variation at play here, depending on how the league plays out. But talk to me about the second pick.
Oh yeah, and man, you are right about the variability. Like just looking at the min maxes from TGFBI, you have Lindor from 10 to 25, Bo Bichette from 13 to 30, Luis Robert 26 to 47, DJ LeMahieu 23 to 44. So yeah, a lot of big spreads in the second round. And so with the second round pick, this is where we'll start talking about these value cliffs a little bit more. Just dollar values allow you to kind of see what's going on in each position. Seeing like, okay, I have groupings of I have 3 first basemen right now that are the exact same value, and I have two second basemen that are the exact same value. But at shortstop, I have one guy that's 3 times higher value than the next guy. Like maybe I want to attack there, even though that shortstop is not as valuable as the top guys available. But that gap is that's what we're talking about. Like attacking that gap, like making sure you don't jump on a position too late and end up with someone. That's why I call them value cliffs. Like that's why they're on my sheet. Just like I don't want to fall off the little cliffs. So with the second pick, 23, uh, you know, with every pick, I run so everything. Going through this here, I've now deleted the first 22 picks from my value calculator. So now everything has readjusted. The numbers have recalculated, not just by their stats, but also by the replacement level at their position. So then I kind of go through the positions. I look at first base and I see I got Jose Abreu and then at $62 and Vladimir Guerrero at 44. Like okay, and I'm taking ADP into this account too. Just like I have guys obviously like everyone I have guys that have really high values that don't match their really low ADPs, vice versa. So I take that into account when making my picks too, like who you can wait on. So then going to second base, that's one of these groupings. I Whit Merrifield at 56 and Ozzie Albies at 54, and then a little bit of a drop off to a couple guys, like 3 guys in the 40s. So that's not a position I want to attack. Like that's a lot of similar guys. Third base, a big gap, not the largest gap, but a big gap. Like Manny Machado at 69.50. Rafael Devers I have next at 56, and then Eugenio Suarez. Yes, my number 3 third baseman is Eugenio Suarez at like 49. Kind of, but there's a gap on Machado, and also I like about Machado is once again 5 category production. I've already started off with Turner. I knew starting off with Turner, and just looking at how heavy pitching already went, because looking at our first round and our own Bubba from Vince with Bubba podcast on RotoBaller is in my league as well, and he's picking 14, and so first round the guys picking him and then the guys picking 15 both went starting pitcher 2 times. Both went pocket aces, and then the next guy went Walker Buehler. So real quick, we had 5 pitchers go, and then Castillo goes 2 picks later. Flaherty goes 2 picks after that. So by the time my second pick comes around at 23, we have 3, 5, 11 pitchers off the board already. So I know I'm not like in this. I see what's coming down the bin. Like, all right, we're going to be one of these leagues going to zag, because that's so I kind of already know now that I'm only going to get one of these next like 15, 20 pitchers if someone falls. Maybe not that many, but next like 10, 15 pitchers if someone falls. Because I'm not gonna jump on a position train just because there's runs happening. So that's why I ended up going with Machado. There's a gap between him and the next third baseman, which is Devers. I don't particularly like Devers, so that's one of those things. It's like, yeah, I trust my evaluations and I trust my projections, but they're not gospel. I know they're not going to come 100% true, and I generally am kind of down on Devers. I worry about some of his plate discipline stuff and other things. So that's just another factor. So yeah, that's why I went with Machado, and now it's like I have Turner, that's 5 category production, along with like plus stolen bases, and then now I have Machado, also 5 category production, and not plus stolen bases, but I have him projected for 10, and that's a fairly reasonable projection. So now with the first 2 picks, I know I'm going to keep hammering offense at this point. But I know I have an excellent start, and now I can, with stolen bases like well in hand, not like forever, but well in hand for the beginning, I can, and also good average. I know that I'm free to kind of go with whatever direction I want on my next pivot.
Yeah, and you started to build your infield, which again I kind of intuitively feel that the infield you're going to see more stark cliffs in value as opposed to outfield obviously, or in pitching. Once you get past that first tier, like you said, the drop off is big enough. Well, in your league, you got 10 pitchers off the board already that early before you've made your second pick. Yeah, at that point, like you said, well, you can either follow the crowd or you can, blaze your own trail. So I'm with you on that, and I'm definitely with you too on the Devers thing. I have some trust issues there, just because he just swings so wildly from being blazing hot to these cold spells, and
Yeah.
I kind of feel like he can still put together similar season long numbers, maybe not from 2 years ago, but decent. But yeah, I think I trust Machado in that lineup a little bit more. So, and they're letting everybody run, so I think 10 stolen bases is pretty good for Machado too. All right, so now you've already said you're going to wait for pitching unless somebody
Yeah.
falls, and that the value's there. So what are you looking at third?
All right. So third round. So I told you by the time I got to my second round pick, 11 pitchers had been taken. After I took Machado, 4 pitchers were taken in the next 5 picks, and then Gallen coming back in the next round. So coming into my third round pick at pick 38, there had been I believe 17 or 18 pitchers taken.
That's insane.
It's pure insanity. And so now I'm looking at my values. It's like, if I want to chase the crowd, then I have to reach my values according to ADP. So I'm at pick 38. Like, yeah, my next pitchers on my values are Josh Hader and Kenta Maeda and Tyler Glasnow and Lance Lynn, Corbin Burns, a lot of guys like in a big grouping all together. Um, Maeda was the top. Like Maeda and Glasnow were kind of in their own at that point. But then I had a bunch of guys that were globbed together that didn't match where I knew they were going to go in ADP, and I'm not going to reach there. So once again, I was going to hammer hitting again, and so looking at my values, I do the same thing. Everything is now recalculated. I've taken off the first 37 picks of the draft and go through my values again. I almost took Jose Abreu here because he's at $72 now, and Vlad is at 51. Significant, $20 cliff, significant cliff. I really like Abreu. There's a lot of first basemen I do not trust in the top 100. I think there's a lot of volatility there, and with the announcement of the deadening of the ball, I'm of the firm belief that I know they've done the lab test. They say it's going to decrease distance by I think like 8 to 10 feet. I do not believe them. It's not that I think they are lying. I just don't, I think they are messing with forces they do not understand, and that's just one of those things that in real life maybe I'm betting on the overcorrection. I'm not the only one. I think you can see that in TGFBI league. There are a lot of teams that did like I did early and have just hammered hitting, like went extreme hitting, and that's kind of what I'm going with, is that the deadening's going to be a little extra. So first base in the top 100, I love Abreu the most, but there's a lot of guys I love later. So even though there's a big cliff there, that wasn't much of an option. Once again, second base, they're still all grouped together. I just took a third baseman in Machado. I'm not going to go there, and even if I wanted to, the next three guys, Devers, Suarez, Rendon, are between $53 and $66 at this point. Not going to mess with that. Yeah, told you about what I like to do on outfield. I like a lot of late outfielders, but I like a couple early outfielders. And this was so I almost took. So at this point in the draft, I have Marcell Ozuna, my number one outfielder, by a significant gap at 91.30. And this is when I do these gaps, these are not adjusted for position. So adjusted for position at this point, Marcel's at 112. But for the cliffs, I like to keep it non-positional. I'm at 91, and I have Nick Castellanos, who went much later. I almost took at 73, and Eloy Jimenez at 72, and George Springer at 72, and Kyle Tucker at 72. But I really like Eloy Jimenez, not just for the potential I think he has, the lineup he's in, but also this is kind of where ADP comes into play, because Eloy is my third highest valued outfielder at 72, and Marcell is a big gap at 91. But Marcell's ADP is 46 and going between 33 and 58. So I don't have to take, I think there's a better chance of him coming back around. Eloy, on the other hand, ADP of 34, and from 25 to 48, and that's 25 to 48 now. I can't believe he went 48 somewhere. I gotta find that now that I'm seeing that. Like, I gotta find that league and see how that. I don't understand how that happened. But when my draft was going on, like he had been taken like from 25 to pick 30, and that's it. So I knew that if I pass on him now, I know for a fact I am not getting him. If I pass on Marcell, there's a decent chance, I think, that he comes back around to me, especially just judging how everyone was still at this point going super heavy pitching. And if he doesn't come back to me, I'm not that upset. Like, yeah, Eloy is, I had a higher value on Ozuna than Eloy, so I took the worst player. But that's not what it's about. That's not what it's about. That's why I'm saying, like, you don't have to just be a complete just robot with your values and projections. Like it's constantly the balance of where you are picking people, where you can pick people, who might come back around, like positions you want to attack. So that's why I went with Eloy third. So now I have, I'm fully on this crazy hitter train. I have Trey Turner, I have Manny Machado, I have Eloy Jimenez, and I just have piles of every category.
And but it's interesting that to hear you say that. Anybody who's watched anything we've done in the last year or so knows that we're both Marcell Ozuna stands. Right, love the guy. I think he's still undervalued. It's pretty obvious he's still undervalued. The fact that he's going, later than those outfielders you already mentioned. But you stuck to your guns. You took the guy that was going to be there, and I mean, taking a little bit of a risk that maybe Ozuna would be available in round 4, but still, the smart thing to do because, like I said, there's no way Jimenez would be there in round 4. Well, except for that one league. Um, was there a happy ending? Did you get Ozuna in round 4?
As a matter of fact, I did. He made it all the way back around. I was very excited about this. Once again, the hitting bonanza started again after I took Jimenez because there'd been a little break, and then coming back around right before I took Ozuna in the 4th, 4 pitchers had just gone straight ahead, like Maeda, Glasnow, Lynn, Burns, boom, boom, boom. Once again, decision had been made for me. If Maeda was there, I would have taken him. I kind of decided that. He was probably the only pitcher I was going to take there, even though my love of Corbin Burns is well known, so I definitely could have taken him there. But this was pitching here is going with the hitter, the strong, picking hitters in the first 3 rounds. I knew that when I finally did take a pitcher, it was going to be a less risky one. And I don't think Burns is risky on talent. I think Burns is risky on any pitch. So that was kind of like, okay, with this build I'm doing, this heavy hitter build, I can't take Corbin Burns, who is going to be pitching in his first full year for a team, the Brewers, that are notorious for kind of holding back their young pitchers as far as workloads go. So that's kind of my thinking there. On so Maeda was the only pitcher I would have taken there, and he went 3 picks before. So then he was the only guy that could have gotten me off of Ozuna because I really wanted Ozuna again. I was okay taking the gamble, but I still really wanted him. I have him and Eloy as basically the same stats, but the value difference comes in that I have Ozuna for more, like 30 more plate appearances and a couple more stolen bases, and looks like about 8 more runs. And so now I'm fully on this hitter train. 2 outfielders, shortstop, third base. They are 4 guys that I love. There are 3 guys that I really, really love. I am perfectly fine with Manny Machado. He is kind of just boring, whatever. One of the things I most like about him is that he's probably going to give me, 690 plate appearances. Like that's, safety. Pile up those plate appearances. Don't underestimate them. So after 4 rounds, like I realize I don't have any pitchers in a year where people are just bound and determined to have as many pitchers as possible. But I think my hitter values are just going by my valuations. But so obviously I think they're great. But my values right now on who I have at each position, I really, really like my offense.
As you should. And, there's something to be said for reliability. Getting a guy, especially, it's not only a 15-team league instead of a 12, but also, reminder, this is an expert league. You're not going to be able to just, pluck guys off the waiver wire really easily and plug them in. So you want somebody who is going to give you those high plate appearance totals and, doesn't have a checkered injury past. So I think it's really especially important in leagues like this that early on you're a little more risk averse. And it's interesting. Why is it a guy like Ozuna, who was, damn near the MVP last year, is going later than a guy, full round later than a guy like Jimenez, who obviously a great talent, but still, like you said, your values, you have Ozuna almost $20 higher, and yet
At
Jimenez
that point, but that was
by that point, yeah,
inflation. So
right.
yeah, uh,
Um,
like going into their original like pre pre-draft, I believe that their values were near like I can tell you real quick, but I'm pretty sure that they were like Ozuna had the edge, but it was a very slight edge, like pre-inflation and whatnot.
mm. But I think a lot of the reasons, even why you see a guy like Bo Bichette in one league going, 13 overall. I mean, we have to admit it's the age thing, right? We fall in love with the young
Yeah,
players, the potential, right? The ceiling that's untapped there. That's what it is, right? Ozuna is a known commodity, and it was like, yeah, we've already seen what he can do. But imagine what Eloy could do, and
yeah. Imagine.
he
Like
might not.
I saw what he could do. He did it last year, and he's gonna do it like just to you know reiterate this point we've been hammering for over a year. But Marcell Ozuna just didn't get good last year. He's always been pretty good. He's been really good since 2018, but he broke 4 of his fingers in the middle of 2018 and completely tanked his batting average. But his his exit velocity numbers, his X stats have been just gotten better every year since 2018, including last year. So, like, he's a known commodity to me. My point, and going back to he, it was a bigger gap between him and Eloy than I thought. Originally, it was I had Marcell at 82 as my number 13 hitter, and Eloy Jimenez at 70 as my number 18 hitter. So $12 gap in value, five spots in like hitter value.
Yeah, and maybe not a huge gap. You can say, well, they're just
Yeah,
close enough, but again, it still begs the question of why is it in almost every league that Jimenez is for sure going higher than Ozuna when we saw what Ozuna did last year. So, and that's what
that
it is.
young
It's the
hotness.
youth, the
People
young
just want to
hotness.
get, and I understand. I love Jimenez, and I love that. Like I want lots of pieces of that White Sox offense because I think it's going to be fun to watch for one thing, but gonna be very very fantasy friendly.
Absolutely. And same thing with Luis Robert. Look, I know the stolen bases are the main appeal there, but again, I think some people are getting a little too hyped up there with the young hotness. And I'm taking a guy who's fallen a little bit based off last year's disappointment. That's Moncada, who I did wind up with later on as my third baseman. And, because his value is a little bit depressed and he's not really going to
Yeah,
give you steals. Maybe, I think projected for maybe 9 or something, but whatever. That's not what you're looking for. I don't think he's going to tank my batting average. I'm not worried about that. Even if he just hits 260 something, give me the homers, runs the RBI production. I'm good with that based on where he's going. So on your now you
right.
got
Agreed. Yeah.
5 picks left. When did you finally come around and say, okay, you know what, I should probably take a pitcher now? Or have you taken a pitcher yet?
Well, I have not at this point. No, I finally broke down. I did it in round 5. I almost didn't do it. I tried to gamble again because I was like, all right, surely these guys are going to slow down on pitching, and I'm glad that I took went pitcher when I did because I take Kyle Hendricks in the fifth, in the middle of the fifth, and then 5 out of the next 6 picks are pitchers once again. So kind of my decision process going into this was I knew I couldn't just I considered going a hardcore, just extreme, like they're gonna dejuice the ball too much. I'm just going to take hitters, and I'll because I think I usually do pretty decent in my pitching staff. Like I figure it out. Like I've always I like pitchers. I probably study them the most. They're kind of the position I worry the least about in fantasy. So I knew I'd put it together eventually, but I couldn't just keep waiting and keep waiting. If one of the top if Liam Hendricks had fell a little bit, like I would have That's another guy I would have, because I did want to lock up some premium saves. That's another, along with stolen base, that's something I didn't do a good enough job of last year. So I wanted to do that, but he goes early. A bunch of other, I could have taken Edwin Diaz at this point. He went the next pick after me. Considered that, but not that long. Just it's Edwin Diaz, and sometimes he just, I don't know, he just brings out the gas can, and I just worry that I'll use this my 5th-round pick on Diaz, and Trevor May will be closing for the Mets by June, just because it's the Mets. So passed on Diaz. Plesac had fallen, which was interesting. And he goes 2 picks after I take Hendricks. So he was a possibility. I've talked about him a lot. I am a believer in him. Unlike I like Burns' talent, going back to Corbin Burns. I like Burns' talent more than Plesac, but Plesac, I don't have as many innings concerns. I think the Indians will let him go a little bit. So Plesac was an option there, but once again, it's the safety thing. It's the I'm okay with the innings, but he's had one really good year of a really high strikeout rate. And, in 2019, he had an 18% strikeout rate and it went up 27.7 in 2020. I believe that strikeout rate. I believe in that a nasty slider and a better curveball than you think. But there's a lot of volatility with taking a young pitcher in the 6th round. So I go with, and once again, just trying to, if I'm going to start off my pitching, I want to start off with something. I wanted to go something nice and safe. I don't think it gets much safer than Kyle Hendricks. I mean, he is a Cub. I'm generally opposed to that. But in this case, I had him, looking at my values going in as I'm doing this hitter, I had always had him as someone I was going to be willing to jump his ADP a little bit. That I kind of, once I knew I was going hitters, Kyle Hendricks was kind of the ideal target. I knew I could make up. I knew I could make up for his weak strikeouts later. That wasn't an issue. But I'm starting off my pitching staff with, elite ratios that I am just not concerned with at all.
Yeah, that's a nice high floor player to have there. It's interesting too because the fact is a lot of people chase the strikeouts early, right? Go for those high strikeout guys. But do you worry at all? Like you said, you're gonna have to make up a little bit for the lack of strikeouts with Hendricks later, but you feel pretty comfortable you could do that because pitchers. So I just wonder then how big are the cliffs left after that? Do you see some clearly established tiers happening? Although I guess pitchers are flying off the board so quickly, it keeps changing every pick. But was there then another clearly defined tier of starting pitchers that were left after that point?
So not really, and that's another. So at this point, going into the Hendricks pick, I had Hendricks at inflated dollars at $104. Next was Plesac at 95, and then Kevin Gausman, Framber Valdez. I'm willing to say all the names out loud that have now been drafted. So if I get cagey with people, it's because they have yet to be drafted. So I had Plesac, Gausman, and Framber kind of together. And then I have a big group of guys. I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 guys between $78 and $70. And honestly, I don't like very many of them. I liked one quite a bit, James Karinchak. But I knew I did not need to take him at pick 68. At that point, I think his minimum was 95. But the other pitchers in that group, me, I'm not taking Jose Barrios, and I have real concerns about Framber Valdez's illusionary strikeout rate. Love Gausman.
You had to remind me about Framber because I wound up taking Framber, and then the very next morning the news about him with a fractured finger. So yeah, I'm still in mourning there. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But yeah, there's, it's not only do I have a big distance between Plesac or Hendricks and even Plesac right after him and all this other group of guys, but it's a combination of guys that are grouped together in value, but also later ADPs and guys that I don't particularly care for, even though my values are like, okay, they're in this, Zach, obviously closers and starters are different, but I kind of meld them together. But it's like yeah, Zach Greinke, who obviously I've made a lot of jokes about. I'm not going to draft him. Yeah, him and James Karinchak have like the exact same value, and I know there's no chance I'm taking Zach Greinke. Um, so that's once again that's what these dollar values kind of allow you to do, and why you don't have to just go exactly off the page. What these dollar numbers don't tell you, you have to take this guy because he is worth more money at this point. What they tell you is of the stats, and with inflation at this point in the draft, and it gives you just a clearer picture. Like it's a lot easier to compare guys. So yeah, so Hendricks was not only a great pick for me there, but I knew that the next like big swath of pitchers I didn't have much interest in, and looking at their ADP, I knew they were going to get gobbled up by the other teams, and I could just kind of float my way through like a kid in a candy store and grab guys I like.
That's a nice feeling to have. And for those who don't know, also the TGFBI, in all NFBC leagues, there's no distinction between starting pitchers and relief pitchers. It's just pitcher spot. So when you talk about, valuing, Karinchak versus Greinke, whatever, the it only matters in terms of the categories you're looking for, but it doesn't matter about filling, spots and roster construction.
Mm.
You just need pitchers, just any pitchers, which I kind of like too, because I hate the whole thing of, designations. We've got like Maeda, who's a starter, but also qualifies as reliever. And then these relievers who
Yeah.
qualify as starters, they never start. So I like that, and not having to worry about filling slots just to fill slots. But again, you still have to keep in mind, look, if I want saves, at some point, I got to strike. And that's something that I'm curious about. So we're not going to get too detailed into the last couple of picks and the value cliffs, because there's still some players yet to be drafted, and
Yeah.
we don't want to give away any government secrets here in terms of your league number, especially because Mr. Bubba is in your league. But let's quickly go over the concept of relief pitchers and how do you value them in terms of the fact that you need saves, right? It's not, I don't know. At least I'm not a believer in the whole punting strategy. I don't punt anything because
No,
I don't
can't
like
win
to
the
just
overall.
hand over a zero in any category. But what maybe not where you don't have to say names, but are there big noticeable gaps there in the relief pitcher market? Even though again, it doesn't have to be qualified as a reliever, just pitchers. As far as those guys, when do you feel like you kind of have to strike at that position, or at least that category?
Well, unfortunately, this next round, the eighth round, after I or I'm sorry, the sixth round, after I take Hendricks, I wanted to, like I said, I wanted to kind of I want to be more aggressive with saves, not just. I still want to piece together some, like I'm not like we've talked about Nick Anderson before, and like I don't care as much as the fact that he might not be the full time closer and get like full time saves. I like the total value of the strikeouts and the ratios along with whatever saves I get. But I wanted to, in the first, 7, 8, I wanted to get one of the like premium closers, going by my values. Hendricks already went. I passed on Diaz. He went shortly after. So going into this round, like Karinchak, I really like Karinchak. But going into this pick, it was early for Karinchak, and I was still going to take him because I was like, no, like this was probably my like big. It took me the longest to like really decide on this, and I was like, no, I'm gonna like Nick, don't gamble. Don't gamble. Like just take Karinchak now. All good. Worry about the hitters later. But this is where kind of value based drafting really comes into play, but also like I think really gives me an advantage. Even though the story ends tragically with Karinchak almost making it back to me, but then getting sniped. Uh, but when I take Kettle Marte, with this pick. And the Karinchak thing stunk, but I also, when I picked Marte, I didn't think I was going to win that gamble. I thought there was a chance. Just looking at like ADPs at that point, I thought there was a chance he would make it back to me. I didn't really, but the heartbreaker was that he almost did. He somehow the guy right before me ended up taking it, so I got my hopes up. But so the reason I go with Marte here is, so looking at my value gaps, and you go to first base, and Vlad was still on the board. That's cool. He was at $81. Next two first basemen were at 65 and 42. It's a pretty big gap there with Vlad. Like, okay, yeah, that's good, but that's not good enough to get me off Karinchak, who I really really like. Looking at the other positions, third base is mostly a big jumble. Suarez is significantly better, but his ADP at this point is significantly lower. Like, if for some reason I want another third baseman, I think I can get Suarez in the next round back, and I could have, going by what actually happened. Outfield, lots of outfielders. I had Nick Castellanos as in a tier by himself before a bunch of other guys that I won't name. Well, actually, I can name one, Mikey Strzemski, because I just picked him before we started doing this pod. But once again, there's a lot of guys I like outfield in the like 150 to 200 range. So even though I loved how much Castellanos was worth at this point, once again, wasn't going to be enough to get me off Karinchak. And then shortstop at this point, I already have a premium shortstop, and there's just a jumble of guys in my value, so I'm not touching that. So the reason I go with Marte, and why drafting this way is helpful so much, is that, so at this point I have Ketel Marte at an $81 value. Now, my next second baseman is one I don't like. Even though he's my second highest valued second baseman at this point, but it's Jose Altuve, and I am worried about a lot of people on that Astros offense. But I was out on Altuve last year, and I'm willing to be out on him again. So I have him at a $41 value. So that's a $40 gap. Now that's not as big a gap as the Castellanos gap. And Marte is not nearly as valuable by total dollar amount as Castellanos, because Castellanos has $25 at this point on Marte, but it's that gap. It's the $40 gap, plus the fact that Marte had fallen. I knew I wouldn't be able to get him next round, but second base is sneaky trashy. Like it's Ketel Marte. At this point, DJ LeMahieu and Ozzie Albies obviously gone, and Whit Merrifield, and so there's still like Jose Altuve around, and some other guys I won't name because they haven't been drafted yet. But if I don't take Marte here, I'm not going to take Altuve. I don't think I can get McNeil, who actually went a couple picks later. Like, I knew he was going to get gobbled up really soon. So like, if I don't take Marte here, I am falling all the way down to I like Mike Moustakas, but he's the next guy I like. He's at $27. So it's like, I know, so I can look at this and go, okay, if I don't take Marte, I don't want Altuve, and I'm not going to obviously draft him this round. I don't think I can get McNeil coming back around. And, if I'm going to take McNeil, I would obviously take, Marte instead, because he's way more valuable. So you fall down this list of players, and it's like, man, the next guy I like is, Marte is almost 4 times as valuable as him. And like, my projections on Marte aren't crazy. Like, looking at other projection systems, they're maybe a little bullish, I guess, but not really. Like, I don't like him as much as the Bad X likes him. I think I like him a little more than ATC, but it's all about that gap. And like, I don't want to get stuck with my starting second baseman. There's other lower second basemen I like, but I don't want them to be my starter. So that's why I ultimately, after hemming and hawing, ultimately took Marte over Karinchak. And like I said, I missed out on Karinchak, but hey, That stinks. That's all right. I think I gained myself. I lost Karen Jack, but what I got paid for losing him was a significant advantage, I think, at second base.
Yeah, and so in a sense, it's almost not just about who you do get at a position; it's who you don't get stuck with. Because if you wait and you miss out, then, like you said, yeah, you're staring at a guy like well Madrigal. He's a fine player, but I mean, you get no
I
power
don't want to
there.
depend on him. Yeah,
I mean, and we don't know even about the run production because he's slated to bat ninth. So, and Marte, it's not that you, like you said, like you love Marte. I mean, had a great 2019 and then very disappointing 2020, but his plate discipline was still really good. So
yeah.
he's a guy who probably is undervalued at this point. But like I said, even though you like Castellanos to project him to be better overall, like I said, it's about where to draft, not just who, but where. I guess if that makes sense. Um, and I feel honestly with something like closer and saves. Look, I'm not going to be the guy. Look, I think in my league we're 11 rounds in. I don't have any saves on the board yet. I'm going to strike pretty soon, but if I'm not getting one of those guys early, I'm going to wait because there's not that many guys I feel comfortable or surely above some of the others. I have a guy in mind. I might take next round, which I won't say because, could get sniped. You never know. But yeah, I'm not going to overpay for saves and closers, especially if I don't need even to fill that relief pitcher slot. So it totally makes sense. All right, so that's where the story ends because at this point, then we're caught up to where we're drafting pretty much. But I think those are all perfect examples of how to use a value-based drafting system because, again, you have to look at case-by-case basis, each position, players relative to each other. And like you said, projections aren't everything. Projections are usually not exactly accurate. They're just kind of a guide. Rankings are not accurate. And it's also interesting to note that every platform you draft on, whether it's NFBC, Fantrax, whatever, their projections are totally different. So the where people go in terms of ADP, it's going to depend on how that platform has them ranked because people look at those because that's how they're listed. So that also plays into it. But the problem is these analyst leagues, as we all know, every projection at every system, and we know better, so we outsmart each other. But that's what
Yeah,
makes it fun, right? I think that's what makes it so fun.
I agree. I agree. It's the gameplay. It's I have a league with we mentioned Bubba in my league, and there's there's a couple other guy. Doug Ishikawa is also in my league, and I know him some. And then there's a bunch of guys I don't know, but then there's also Ryan Bloomfield, who is really good. The guy that beat me out for Baseball Writer of the Year is apparently now here to try and beat me in TGFBI too. So I don't know why he is so mean, but he is. He's one of the going by manager ratings for DGFBI. Like he kills it every year. So I know like there's this is a sharp room, and you have to be it's selective aggression. Like I'm always going to go get my guys, but at the same time I want to balance that with trying to get the most value I can and just really attack every position and just not fall off those cliffs. Not pass on Ketel Marte and fall down to a guy who's worth three times as Marte is worth three times more. Like trying to avoid those situations. And like I said, it's a lot of smarter people than me have said it before. Looking at things as dollar values is just one of the bigger leaps you can make in like getting the edge over your league mate.
There you go. And when you're in a league like this, it's like playing chess against 14 other guys at the exact same time, which is pretty fun if you're into that kind of thing, which we are. Obviously, anybody watching and listening here is too, I would think. So
my draft's going crazy right now. 7 picks just got made in like the last 60 seconds. I'm watching TGFBI right now, and there's some guys who are on auto around the turn, I guess, because they just started flashing up.
wow.
All right.
I say we're past midnight Eastern time, so they must have their
Yeah.
queue set.
I know. I didn't think we were going to be doing this. My leagues. I mean, we're pretty fat. We just started the 11th round,
Hmm.
so we've been really booking it, especially today. I think we went like through over 3 rounds today, so not bad.
Nice, nice. All right, well, yeah, we gotta check our cues and keep making our picks. We'll talk about the rest of it probably another time, but that does it for now. Hopefully this was helpful, and we'll be back with more draft content. It's draft season, draft's in the air. We got another couple of weeks, and then finally opening day. Thank God. So
So close,
so close.
so excited. There's every day. There's like it's a simple pleasure, especially after the nonsense last year of like getting online, turning on a TV, and be like, I have options to watch people playing baseball. It's happening right now, and I don't just have one option. I can watch multiple games. It is really fantastic. And now we're like starting to get into the swing of things.
Yeah, dissecting like innings and individual pitches from spring training games, it never was as satisfying, I think, as it is now. So we're just soaking it all in. All right, guys. We'll be back again each and every week. Of course, hit that subscribe button if you haven't for some reason, and check out the audio version if you're not already listening to the audio version on YouTube. If you're not watching on YouTube, we have video and audio of all these podcasts and many others. Nick already mentioned we got Bubba on there, Bases Loaded Pod with Mike Kurland, so much more content, and of course the King and Pocket Aces also break down some baseball content for you. So
I think I'll be on there coming up soon.
yeah,
I think we're gonna be doing some stuff talking. Scott put out a really nice article on RotoBaller right now, breaking down our custom ranking tool, which is my beautiful little baby for point leagues. It's for our premium subscribers, and you play points. You can we have different ranking tools set up for every platform, just like with the default settings. But we also have a custom option. You fill out a form, tell us what all your scoring settings is, and then within a day, you get a nice little email from me with a couple of fancy spreadsheets breaking down every little thing in your league, and even in point league values. I'll give you projected points, but I'm also going to give you the dollar values of how much these players are worth. And if you play points, it's a really nice thing. But yeah, Scott did a couple days ago up on rotoballer.com right now is he really broke down how the tool how our custom rankings work. Just basically he acted like the customer and filled out the form, and I sent him the spreadsheets and gave him some explanations on how the values were calculated and kind of how to use these things. And he wrote a beautiful article because he's a great writer. So go to RotoBaller, check that out.
absolutely. The King himself, Fantasy Sports Writer Association Hall of Famer for a reason. So absolutely, all this stuff you can't get anywhere else. So, and we'll let you get on your points league soapbox another time. That's for a whole nother show.
Always, I live up there.
Oh, I know. Don't I know it? All right, guys. Thanks for watching.
Thanks.